This video guide will walk you through steps to create the clarinet player. So we'll start off with the trousers. We'll start by using chain stitch in order to create a run of leaves going down the trousers. So I'd first start by doing a row of chain stitch down the full stem of the leaves. There's a separate how-to video on the website talking through how to use chain stitch. Here I'm using the link method, but you'll see there are videos for both the link method and the loop method. I'd recommend getting a scrap piece of fabric and testing out both, as you'll find one feels more natural than the other. When it comes to doing the leaves, you can either do these in a chain stitch as well, as I'll do here, or if you find that a bit hard, you can just do them in a few straight stitches to create the shape. If you use the chain stitch to create the leaves, what you'll do is you will create a loop, as here, and then just secure that loop in place in the position of the leaves. I'll show you again here. We create a loop, go up through it, and create a short stitch securing that thread in place. This is a quick way to create the shape of leaves. You could use it on lots of other things, do petals, for example. So once you've completed those, we'll start doing the edge of the trousers. So first step, we do a run of stitches down in gold thread. We'll create this in running stitch. Again, there's a separate video on running stitch. If you find the straight stitch video, that covers both satin stitch and running stitch. It's nice to try and keep each length of each stitch around the same, and that creates quite a neat finish. So continue this round the full border of the trousers. Once that's done, we'll then go on to add the chain stitch on the outside of this gold thread. We use the dark green thread to create this. Now here I'm using a loop method. It really doesn't matter again. But the key is just to have the chain stitch going alongside so you can still see the gold thread. Often people find that chain stitch ends up becoming their favourite stitch to do. It's a very satisfying stitch and creates a lovely effect. And once you've gone round the full length, then that's the main area of the trousers complete. So after that, we'll go on to create the belt. And this belt uses French knots. So if you've never done French knots before, they can be a little intimidating as they generally require you to use two hands. There's a separate video on French knots specifically, but the key is probably to practice on a scrap piece of fabric first. It's much easier if you have your hoop be held in the frame like this, as it enables you to more easily use both hands. But I myself only bought the frame about a month ago, and therefore, until that point, I would either just rest it on the table or on top of a pile of books, so I could use both hands. See a close up here that I'm wrapping the thread around the needle around about 3 times to create a lost body. But the more you wrap around the needle, sometimes the harder that can be to pull it through, and therefore you may find it easier, particularly when you're beginning, just to wrap it around the needle, maybe once or twice. That will just mean you'll end up doing a few more French knots to fill the area. So once you finish that, let's go on to do the cuffs of his trousers. Here we're just going to use a satin stitch in the bright pink. The satin stitch is just straightforward, going from top to bottom in a looping style. We work across, filling out this whole area of the cuffs of the trousers in this satin stitch. And again, we will use the satin stitch when it comes to filling in the shoes too. The gold thread can be a bit tricky to work with if you've never used it before. It has a tendency to snag a bit, and you'll find when you get a bit down towards the end of the thread, it starts to separate a bit. If you find the end is getting a bit raggedy, then just end the thread, cut it off, and get a new piece. All the kits have plenty of gold thread, because I know that sometimes you may find you get in a bit of tangle, and therefore it's easy just to cut the thread out and start again. Once you've filled the whole body of the shoes, then I think it's nice to go along and add a row of running stitch at the bottom. This gives the illusion of the soles of the shoes and helps to finish it all off. So we'll move on to the clarinet. Now the clarinet isn't marked on the fabric, as that way you can create this however shape you'd particularly like. The way I think is best to get a straight direction though is to add one long stitch from where you want the clarinet to finish and where you want it to end. That way you have a guide to go over when you start to fill out the shape of the clarinet. You'll work this using a satin stitch in the dark grey. As you work from the top to bottom, I'm basically just making my stitches get slightly wider. I'll work around so that I go around the end of his sleeves, going through that gap in the middle. And then as I get towards the bottom, I really widen out that stitch to create the end shape of the clarinet. That's in. You can then use the gold thread. So to position the keys, I first go a few stitches over the top of the black in the areas where I want the keys to be. You can do as many or as few as you like. But you see here, I'm just adding a few the whole way down the length of the clarinet. And then I'll add a bit of gold at the end, just to really decorate it, and who doesn't like a bit of gold? And once those in, then you can go on to add the French knots which form the end of the keys. You can see here I add a French knot at the end of each little section of gold. And once you go down and do all of those, then that's your clarinet finished. You could do this after you've done the jumper or before. It doesn't really matter the order you do it in. So now I'm going to go on to do the outline of the jumper. So working in the orange thread, I'm going to go round, and on these orange lines, I'm going to add 2 rows of chain stitch. I want to add 2 rows, as between the both, I'm going to end up adding a line of gold straight stitch. You'll be able to see this very obviously in the next step of the video. So here you can see clearly the 2 rows of chain stitch. I'll use chain stitch also at the top of the jumper in order to add on the collar. There's not a particularly fine art to this. You just want to add a bit of height so you connect with the head and the jumper. You can even just use a satin stitch if you'd like, whichever you prefer. Now I'll get the gold thread back out again, and I'll start adding this straight stitch round in the gap of the chain stitch on a jumper. What this ends up doing is creates a sort of subtle glinting on the edges of the jumper, but it's not too obvious. You'll basically just follow round the guide that is the 2 lines we've already created. And once that's completely done, the final step on the jumper is to add some satin stitch into his sleeves. So we take the pink thread and we'll just fill out the gap on his sleeves with a satin stitch. Now comes the crown. We're going to work the whole way around the outside edges of the crown using a satin stitch. On these narrow sections at the bottom of the crown, the satin stitch will be very narrow in itself, and so it could feel a bit fiddly when you're doing it. If you end up missing little sections, you won't notice from a distance because of the yellow printed on the fabric. Therefore, it's hard to see if there are any gaps between the gold strands. So once you finish the outside edge, we'll go on to do the central piece of the crown. I'd use a couple of long strands to create this triangular shape, and then go round the edge of the circle. You can really do this any way you see fit, but I think this is the easiest way to create the shape. And then we'll just simply add a cross at the top, using a couple of stitches. This crown has some stripes going on the fabric between the edges, and this is just added in a running stick. So you take the pink thread and then just add the lines on a diagonal, trying to keep the distance between each line roughly the same. Once the crown is done, you can go on to add his hair, and again we'll be doing this in French knots. The hair isn't marked on the fabric, as I want to give you the scope here to create whatever hairstyle you'd like. By using French knots, it creates a real ringlety effect, gives the volume of hair. But if you'd rather, you can use some kind of straight stitch here, By this point, you'll probably be pretty experienced with all the stitches, so you can use your imagination to create whatever hair you like. After that's done, we'll take the light pink thread and we'll go on to creating his face. So I think it's nice to draw a line of an eyebrow underneath the hair. And then we'll add eyes and the mouth. Again, you can do this whichever way you'd like and whatever character you'd like. But if you'd like, you can see here how I created the face with the two eyes and the mouth ready to play the clarinet. But do what you think is best. So, with the mouth finished, there's the clarinet player done.